Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. Today's horror retro movie review takes us back to 1957, to an absolute classic in the genre, but one which isn't often talked about in the same way as many of the Hammer horror films that came out and were coming out around the same time. This is a film called The Night of the Demon, which was released towards the end of 1957, and unfortunately for the film, it came out a few months after Hammer made its breakthrough with Frankenstein, in all its lurid Technicolor glory, and poor old Night of the Demon was left sitting in a little puddle of monochrome, unloved and unregarded, not particularly successful at the time. But as I said, it has now been regarded as an absolute classic, and I'm going to tell you why. Hello, welcome back. My name is Paul Mount. If you are new here and you like your cult movies, your cult horror, science fiction, TV, unboxings, Doctor Who, all that sort of stuff, then why not stick around and subscribe to the channel? Press that button there, which will subscribe you. And to make it even easier, there's a QR code. So just hold your phone up to the QR code, your QR reader, and here we are. You're all part of the family. It'd be wonderful to have you all on board. Night of the Demon. I watched this the other night on this rather gorgeous Indicator... this Indicator Blu-ray box set, which came out a few years ago. I bought this and I'd not looked at it since I bought it. I've seen the film several times in the past, so I was quite familiar with it. But I was quite keen to watch it again because it has been a while. And this is a really nice box set, which is sadly no longer available. This is a terrific film, which, as I said, is frustratingly overlooked in the history of British horror because the late 50s, the 60s were the domain of Hammer. And as I mentioned, they were just starting to find their way in the genre with Frankenstein and Dracula, which they were doing around this time. And Night of the Demon was lost in its wake, really, and sort of slipped into obscurity. But over the years, it's gained a fantastic reputation and is extremely well regarded with aficionados of the genre, which I'm not necessarily one of, but I do like the classic horror films. I do like the Hammer films. Lots of these moody, atmospheric British horror films of the time. Much more entertaining than today's stabby, slicey, unsubtle, body horror, gory things, which really have very little time for. Night of the Demon was directed by Jacques Tourneur. Stars Dana Andrews, Peggy Cummings, Neil McGuinness. Produced by Hal E. Chester and Frank Beavis, and was adapted from the M.R. James story, Casting the Runes, which has been dramatised many times over the years. This is a different spin on that particular story. If you read Casting the Runes, I haven't read it for many years. I seem to recall it's based around a slighted writer trying to get his revenge on somebody who's given his latest book a bad review. Oh, we've all been there. The film version is about American psychologist Dr. John Holden, played by Dana Andrews, who comes to the UK to investigate a satanic cult which appears to be growing in strength and power. Holden is a skeptic. He doesn't believe in that sort of mumbo-jumbo, so he's come to the UK to try and debunk it. He's supposed to be meeting up with Professor Harrington, played by Maurice Denham, who is greatly concerned about the activities of one particular cult, run by Dr. Julian Carswell, played with an Aleister Crowley-ish relish by Neil McGuinness. But as the film starts, we see that Harrington appears to be trying to shake off a curse which has been put upon him by Carswell. And when he heads home from a frantic meeting with Carswell, he gets home and is attacked by something monstrous which appears from the shadows. His car crashes into an electricity pylon and he's electrocuted and killed. This is the first point at which the film becomes controversial because the director and the writer Charles Bennett were absolutely determined that there should be no monster in this film. But the producer, Hal E. Chester, he had other thoughts. He wanted the demon on screen. Once the film was made and left to be edited, as was often the case at the time, directors weren't closely involved in the edit of the film. So very often what they saw months later was not quite what they had filmed. That was very much the case with this particular film. And under Chester's instructions, additional scenes were filmed which showed a monster. And that is the main bone of contention about the film. The film concerns itself with this battle between the old evil and the old magics and modern skepticism, modern science, which doesn't believe in this sort of mumbo-jumbo. And that's what John Holden represents. He has several clashes with Dr. Carswell, and the two are quite evenly matched as intellects. Carswell is clearly a very powerful man. He certainly has some powers, some demonic powers, and this is all based around the ideas of the occult and witchcraft and black magic that was so prevalent in the early 20th century when M.R. James and others were writing stories like this. So the inclusion of a monster was something of a sticking point between producer and director, but the producer got his way in the end. And I can understand why Jacques Tourneur was concerned, because the film would work as well without the monster. But I think the monster does add something to the film, particularly at the beginning, because we have this sequence where Maurice Denham's character arrives home after his desperate meeting with Carswell, and we see the first manifestation of this creature. There are only two manifestations in the film, and it's done very well because it's dark out in the countryside, and there's this strange fog of smoke which appears in the air, an optical effect presumably, which is very atmospheric and very moody. And then we see a creature appearing. Opinions differ about whether they should have left it there as just a shape, something moving in the darkness, or whether they should have done what they actually did and create and show a monster. When we see the creature, we see this slow-moving, devilish type creature. I think that's the only way you can describe it, as sort of a representation of Satan, this horned beast, hooved, that appears from the smoke. And it's actually quite unnerving and quite effective and quite creepy because it's a shape. We can see it's some sort of monster. Where the film betrays itself is when we see it in close-up. We see this rather ridiculous, unconvincing monster mask with a flapping tongue roaring. And then there's a couple of other scenes where we see it in the clarity of close-up that we don't really need, particularly in the last reel where it appears again. But I certainly think that the creature, when it appears in the smoke and you see a shape, but you can't quite make out what it is, that's effective. And I think they should have left it there, because sometimes it's better to imagine things. The imagination can do the work a lot better than some ropey rubber costume. And I think that's certainly the case here. I don't disagree with Hal Chester that it was important to see a manifestation of the evil. But I think it's a question of degree. We didn't need to see it in the detail that we did, because when we did see it in detail, it ruined the illusion. We see it again in the last act, after there's been a final confrontation between Holden and Carswell on a train. Carswell's in a panic. He's now got this rune, this thing which identifies him as a victim of whatever this creature is. He's on a train heading to Southampton. He gets off the train. He can't catch up with his rune, which is floating away from him. And suddenly the thing appears again. We see the smoke. We see the creature. And again, it's quite effective when you see the shape of it in the distance. But then we see it attacking Carswell and the illusion's gone. The illusion's ruined. It completely betrays the atmosphere that the film has worked hard, very successfully to create by showing this thing in unnecessary detail, because it makes it a rubber monster. And I think that the director later said that it just makes it something that was aimed at teenagers. You've got a monster in this film, that'll bring the kids in. And it's a shame, because it completely undermines what the film had been doing up until that point. Beyond all that, though, there's a lot to recommend in this film. There's some great location filming around London. I always love seeing films in the 50s and 60s set around London. And I very often Google Maps to see if those places where it was filmed look anything like that anymore. You'd be surprised watching these films how some of these locations, although they are a bit different, you can sort of see where certain things were filmed. I love stuff about locations. Anything that shows you old streets and areas where things were filmed absolutely fascinates me. And I love seeing old London back in those days. The old streets and cars and the whole look of London, which of course is slightly different these days. Great performances. Dana Andrews plays John Holden. You may remember he appeared in Cracking the World, that great 1965 science fiction film that I reviewed a few months ago. His career was felt to be on the decline at the time, yet he'd been in quite a few films up until the time this was made. He was quite a busy actor. Unfortunately, it appears that he was a bit difficult to work with. He had a drink problem, as a lot of the American stars who came over to the UK to make films seemed to have problems with drink. And he clashed, as many people did, with the producer Hal Chester, who would come onto the set and he would try to tell Jacques Tourneur what to do and how to make the film. And Dana Andrews at one point threatened to walk off if the director wasn't just left to get on with it. I think there were some issues then with his behaviour, but I think his performance on screen, he has that stoic determination of a man who doesn't believe in any of this mumbo jumbo, this hokum, and he wants to get to the nub of what this is all about, and starts to believe. There is one quite chilling sequence where he has broken into Carswell's country house to try and find out a little bit more about these rooms and these messages and so on. And he's trapped in the room, and Carswell's cat suddenly seems to transform itself into a panther that attacks him. And then he leaves the house once he's been confronted by Carswell, and he heads back the way he came through the forest. And it looks as if this thing's going to manifest itself again. You see this smoke brewing up and footsteps. There's a very good scene, something moving through the woods, and you see, I love those TV shows and films that do this, where you see indentations of footprints of something invisible that's walking through the darkness. And this is where I think Holden's own belief systems start to crumble a little bit, because he's witnessed something which he can't quite explain. And obviously he goes to the police, along with Peggy Cummings, who plays Joanna Harrington, who's the daughter of Maurice Denham's character, who dies at the beginning of the film. And of course the police don't believe this, they think it's all nonsense. And it all leads to the ultimate confrontation, which is really well done. I think that Neil McGuinness's performance as Carswell is really good. He's very urbane. He's got access to strange black magic abilities, which set him above people. And it gives him an arrogance and a smugness, which is very effectively portrayed. And it's quite interesting to watch all that crumble, and he gets flustered. You can see things are sort of falling apart in the last few minutes of the film. It's such a well-made film. It's really atmospheric. It's really creepy. It's powerful. It's a very good script. It's very well written. And interestingly, when the film was made, again, it's an unfortunate side effect of studios and producers not really understanding what they'd got. The original cut of the film ran to 96 minutes, but then it was hacked down to 82 minutes before it was released in the United States, where it was called Curse of the Demon, where it was just forced to suffer the ignominy of being second feature to other films. So it didn't really get a lot of attention at the time. Interestingly, the original 96-minute version of the film played across Europe, and that's the one which eventually made its way back to the UK under its proper title, Night of the Demon, and that's the one which I watched the other night. This Blu-ray edition has both versions of the film, as well as loads of special features, extra features and so on, and I watched the 96-minute version. I don't think I've ever seen it at that length before, and it does benefit from having a bit more time to breathe, a bit more character stuff, lots of little scenes. Actually, I was looking in the booklet that supports the release, which is a really thorough booklet, which has lots of essays about the making of the film and the various personalities of the people involved in the film. And as always, these books are beautifully put together with fantastic illustration. And it details some of the trims and things that were made. And it's quite interesting that little cuts were made in earlier scenes that necessitated or required cuts later on, because later sequences reference bits that have been cut out. So they were very careful in the way they edited it to make sure that it still made sense in its shorter cut. But I think that the added scenes do give it a bit more room to breathe and a bit more space to develop. It is now acknowledged as one of the great horror films of all time, certainly one of the great British horror films. And it is a shame that it was underappreciated at the time, but that's an inevitable consequence of Hammer suddenly breaking through with these gory, for the time, graphic horror films that were, as it turned out, reinventing the universal horror characters of the 30s with Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy and so on, that came to dominate the genre in the 60s. But the Night of the Demon, I'm glad it's being recognised now. And as I said, scholars of horror will talk about this film endlessly. And it is a terrific film. It's a very powerful piece of filmmaking, particularly because it deals with the occult and black magic, the idea of dealing with demonic forces and the devil and so on. And this is a film where it's done really well, very intelligently, and very well put together as a film. And it is a shame that it was sort of knocked around by the studio and the producers to try and turn it into something it was never intended to be. Night of the Demon, highly recommended by me. I'm going to give this film 9 out of 10 because it is a genuine genre masterpiece. And as I said, this was the chunky set that came out a few years ago. Not available now, so I don't know why I keep showing it to you. But you can get the standard edition, which is the disc itself. DVD, Blu-ray, and sure it's got the special features as well. It just hasn't got the nice box. An excellent film. If you've never seen it, I would advise you urgently to track it down. Right, thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this video looking back at Night of the Demon. There's loads more stuff to come on this channel, so you might as well stick around really. So just press that like and subscribe button. Leave a comment down below, and of course the QR code is there for you to scan with your phone. So you need never miss another chance to look at me. Come on, life can't get much better than that. Right, I'll see you soon. Loads of stuff to come, as I said. I have got a couple of TV retrospectives I'm dying to get on with. One of them is a classic TV series which spanned the late 60s and the early 70s. And I've done some research on it, but not enough. I can't get enough information. And I've ordered a book which came out many years ago, which I'm hoping is going to come any day, which is going to give me the chance to sort of give you a bit more detail about this show than I would have been able to give you otherwise, because I don't want to tell you half the story. And I've also got in mind a couple of comedy shows that I want to look back at. I did Fawlty Towers, which seemed to go down quite well last month. So I'd like to do another great classic comedy show. So there's loads of stuff to come. So don't go away. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.